Die Sprachübertragung beginnt jetzt. Alle Teilnehmer befinden sich im Zuhörermodus.
So, hello everyone and welcome to our BAI webinar on the EU infrastructure investment outlook. I'm happy to introduce to you a renowned speaker on this field. He told me I should keep the introduction short because he has a lot of slides. He's going to have a lot of content for us. It's going to be very interesting. Please let me introduce to you the CEO of Amundi Energy Transition, Matthieu Poisson. Matthieu is going to guide us. Roland, next slide, please. Matthieu is going to guide us through the infrastructure mid-market in EU. As you know, there's the target of climate neutrality until 2050, in German even 2045, which requires a lot of investment in the renewable energy field. Therefore, from 2015 to 2023, we could see a big push for the sector, also backed by governmental support. And as also Matthieu now is going to tell us, from probably last year on, the environment has hardened a little bit, and he will give us a broad overview on various infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure sectors and markets in Europe, such as renewable energy, storage, mobility, grid efficiency, and industrial decarbonization. Roland, next slide, please. If you're interested in this webinar, probably you will like our infrastructure report, our BAI infrastructure report, Germany 2025 as well. If you don't know it yet, in August it was published in English as well, and you can download it for free with this QR code. It will give you an overview on the status quo of the situation in Germany, or also discusses the governmental special fund for infrastructure, and it puts a spotlight on the field of municipal infrastructure in Germany. And another announcement on our own behalf, we have two upcoming events now in November, which are also thematically relevant for you, with our Real Assets and Wealth Management Symposium on the 13th of November in Frankfurt, discussing infrastructure, real estate, also municipal infrastructure. Then we have the BAI workshop, Sustainable Finance and ESG, at 27th of November in Frankfurt. So now I hand over to Matthieu.
Thank you very much, Florian. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. We're going to go through the document, which is very, very heavy in information. So I will go as quickly as I can, but you will receive the document after the seminar. So you will be allowed to consult it in more details. Today, I'm concentrating on the key messages only. So first of all, a quick exec sum. So basically, we're going to try to give you a highlight view of 16 different energy transition asset classes, and maybe give our views of whether or not it's a good idea to invest in these verticals, depending on which market. The energy transition market is highly atomized in Europe, so you need to look closely at what you're investing in order to be reasonably successful. Two big ideas across sectors, let's put it that way. The sector of energy transition is highly addicted to public money to subsidize a lot of business models. I tend to be very careful on these because once there is a political uncertainty, obviously the public support can be a bit weaker. So it's just a quick illustration of how the cost of producing energy for the energy transition has completely collapsed. And we are reasonably, let's say, optimistic on my sector because in the long term, it is a viable economic proposal. Just to give you an idea, a newly built nuclear plant in France probably has a cost of electricity around 140 euros. you can see that solar is probably more in the 40 to 50 euros. So let's say we consider the fundamentals to be very good in the long term, but you have to be careful in the short term. As opposed to this, you can look, for example, at biomethane. Biomethane is still 3 times as expensive as normal gas. The second big idea is a lot of European countries don't have a lot of alternatives. They want to get rid of coal. They want to get rid of the Russian gas. And new nuclear build is probably not a huge option. So a lot of them, like Italy and Spain, are definitely looking at energy transition, not from just pure decarbonation, but also because it is economically viable. And the last, let's say, big idea on mid-market, what I do is invest with developers in the mid-market sector. So typically it's a ticket of equity between 50 and 100 million. What has changed dramatically is, let's say, 2015, when I started investing, to 2023. The philosophy of the developers was, let's raise some cash from the equity investors every 18 months, maybe 50 million, maybe 100 million. It was super easy. And let's burn the cash as fast as we can. The idea is that we need, as a developer, to grow as much capacity and as much capacity. So it's basically, at all costs, let's not pay attention to the cost of employees. Let's not pay too much attention at the cost of acquiring the project. We need as much gigawatts as we want. The sky in terms of government support was clear, blue sky roughly for everybody, so no worry on that. And a lot of sectors, which is worrying, had no barrier to entry. So typically the most absurd example is in France, electrical vehicle recharging infrastructure. You have more than 100 developers today. It is completely absurd. Everybody knows today there's going to be maybe 10 in the future. Also characteristic of, let's say, the bubble of my sector was you met a lot of people with no barrier to entry, who were pure paper developer, i.e. they had zero technical know-how. They would just assemble solution to build the asset, to operate the asset, to fund the asset, but they were purely financial company, a lot of these. Also, you met a lot of, let's say, entrepreneurs with crazy dreams, saying, oh, I'm building a lot of solar, I'm going to replace EDF as an independent power producer in the next 24 months. Obviously, completely absurd. Another system let's say, saying that, oh, solar is very plain vanilla. All the sector is very plain vanilla. So I met people who told me, oh, hydrogen is fantastic. The technology is completely mature. It's as reliable as solar. Obviously, completely absurd. I'll come back again to the new environment. And the last thing was obviously expectation of valuation that were sky high. And I witnessed a CEO of a company who said, okay, either you buy my management business plan or I'm not continuing discussing with you. Obviously, this period is completely over. What has changed in my sector, which is mid-market, big equity drought in mid-market. You cannot, I'm on 15 different situations of broken auction, i.e. people who came back every 18 months to raise 15 to 100 million equity. Nobody is answering the phone. So they have a big cash crisis because they have a big pipeline to build. So they need a lot of money to do the capex, but equity investors are no longer answering. So obviously, this means survival of the fittest. There will be a huge amount of death in my sector and a lot of opportunity to consolidate the sector. The second good news of this equity drought is people are going to stop subsidizing companies without solid business model, and I'll come back to that. We are seeing catastrophes in giga battery factory. We're seeing catastrophes in hydrogen, etc. So people who didn't have a very solid business model are going to hit the floor, and it's going to leave basically a much healthier environment to invest money. So more barrier to entry, less player concentration. So that's why we think it's a good idea to start looking at the sector now. Third aspect is political wobble, Belgium, France, Spain, etc., where basically as an investor, you have to do a lot of homework to assess your risk and invest in fully knowledgeable circumstances, and do your job sector by sector. The underlying dynamics is not just to get some subsidies, it's to understand the long-term viability of the infrastructure that you pay for. The debt financing is still there. Again, the big problem is the equity financing, and basically we are now in a position that there is a more technical challenge in my sector. I'll come back to that. And therefore, if you have a company which has no knowledge in operating or building batteries, who has no knowledge, for example, to handle curtailment, you're not going to survive for a very long time. So again, in terms of entry point, in terms of valuation, it is hugely favorable. Today, I'm buying companies and I'm doing 2 to 3 times the money with just 30% of the business plan of the management, while 5 years ago, I had to basically pay for 100% of the management's business plan. If we move, so table of content, again, you will have the document, so you can refer to it later in more details. We'll try to cover as much as we can. So we can move to the following page. And this is basically the market I know a little about. I'm not the greatest specialist of Germany, but let's say we see 150 deals every year, and we cover essentially the Eurozone plus the UK. And we're going to go to try to give you a little brief on that. Okay. Up. So for the solar, which is, let's say, one of the most plain vanilla assets in the sector, over which there is still, let's say, top line momentum is definitely there. Basically, the main problem today is negative pricing and overproduction. So you need to be able to do 2 things, which are not within the reach of most developers. The first is to integrate a battery and to manage it yourself. Most companies tell you I can put a battery on my solar fields. Yes, they can, but they don't know how to operate it. They don't have the software, which are hugely sophisticated. And if you don't manage your own batteries with your solar, you're not going to survive, essentially. The second idea is that a lot of, let's say, public subsidies are disappearing in markets like Spain, Belgium. It's also a little bit wobbly in Italy. So you need to move progressively with your asset towards corporate PPAs. The top of the market, and this requires new people, new capability. Corporate PPAs are super long to handle. I mean, it usually takes a year and a half, and you need a distribution capacity. So if you can't basically meet these challenges, i.e. curtailment, battery, corporate PPA, your ability to survive in the future is going to be pretty limited. And this basically is also a big driver to concentrate the developers. So Spain is probably the single most dangerous market today. The reason is they have, let's say, a massive negative pricing problem, too many developers, and we are seeing like almost every week now demands for equity to finance brownfield. But the main problem they have is negative curtailment, so the need also for battery, and also, let's say, a market which is now very strongly biased toward corporate PPA and a very intense competition. So it's a high risk, not super high return market. We're looking at opportunities, but we think it's probably not the best place to invest your money today in Europe. In Italy, it is a very well-structured market. Also, the growth has been a little bit slower. We think from a purely regulatory point of view, it is still very supportive. There's a lot of corporate activity, a lot of concentration. We think it's a healthy market because the regulator and the grid operator has a very well-structured policy, contrary to Spain, where it's a little bit more difficult. So this is definitely a market that we look at where we think there's a lot of opportunity, and typically they're not investing in solar or renewable to be clean. They're investing there because they're hugely dependent on gas, and they're not going to build nuclear. So we think it's a healthy market. I'm going to move to Germany, where I'm not a huge specialist. I think Germany, I see a lot less opportunities, but I think it's because it's probably more structured around bigger players. The environment is reasonably stable, and there's a strong political support. I'm just worried usually when I see so many opportunities to do exclusive discussion with companies. Let's say usually the auction situation when you want to work with the developer is more difficult because there's a little bit too much institutional money. So the returns are not as exciting as in the rest of Europe. Just to give you a rough idea, when I started this business in 2017, brownfield leveraged solar with regulated revenue, your equity return was between 5.5 and 6%. Over the last auction, we are around 8.5%. And the German market is by far the most expensive because the regulation is very safe. So I'm not going to spend too much time because I think in terms of opportunities to buy cheap assets and make a good return, Germany is probably not my preferred market today. Netherlands, we are very careful on Belgium, which is probably one of the most the riskiest in terms of political instability, and frankly also Netherlands is a little bit better, but it's a small market, so we don't see many developers that we could co-invest with in platform deals. Although we see the top of them. Belgium is probably one of my least favorite markets for essentially a political reason, which makes it a very unsafe market, I think, for investors today. Sweden, there is also typically compared to, again, Italy, which is pretty well structured in terms of organizing the grid, organizing demand and supply, and having a supportive let's say subsidy situation. Sweden and the Nordics in general are some of the worst. They're the worst because there's now a lot less support. It is essentially a merchant corporate PPA market for development. And there was a couple of catastrophes in the sector. So people with no industrial backbone, no industrial know-how to manage these assets have entered this market because it was a low barrier to entry. And you've got quite a lot of corporate failure of bigger or smaller proportion. Poland, Greece is certainly one of the most attractive environment in terms of regulation and in terms of grid. It is quite solid, it is quite stable, and there's definitely a big upside in terms of need to equipment and to deploy. So this is what, and the returns, although there's quite a few German investors in Poland already, the returns are, let's say, reasonably high compared to the rest of Europe. You've got some very good, let's say, mid-cap developers, very active, and this is definitely a market that we monitor very carefully. And I would definitely, it's a reasonably safe environment for investors. So if I was to allocate my portfolio, that would be one of my priority region. Solar in France basically has a good, let's say, historical mix. There is some political wobble, which obviously creates uncertainty. This is typically a market where there is very low barrier to entry, a lot of players. So there will be a lot of corporate debt, and opportunity to consolidate the sector around a few big players who are, again, I'm repeating, able to manage battery, able to manage curtailment, and able basically to buy the asset that the other guys will not be able to look. So we've done a couple of deals over the last 12 months. You have to spend a lot of time with the companies that you invest with to find out basically their ability to do the extra return. What I'm saying is I closed a couple of days ago a big portfolio in solar. The key thing is, yes, you buy a baseline return on your equity of maybe 8%, okay? But the whole idea, specifically with solar, is what is the type of upside you can expect from plugging in battery, redeveloping the asset, increasing the portfolio. Because essentially in my sector, there is a lot of pushback in terms of new greenfield assets. The key, obviously, is to buy one asset and basically move the needle from your 8% base case contracted revenue over 15 years to the double-digit 10 to 12%. To do that, it's not a fund that can do it for you. It's not an investor who can do it. You need to co-invest and to invest in platforms to benefit from this. But again, if you're careful, this is not the worst market. The risk is mainly in France around other asset classes like onshore wind. Onshore wind, obviously, it's one of the most, much more difficult to create new capacity just because people don't want it in their backyard. This is where we see a lot of people exiting the market because they bought it on a plain vanilla 25-year contract with no curtailment and no negative pricing. Huge opportunities again to buy back assets from purely financial investor, to build a platform with a professional and to redevelop the asset. So basically redevelop, you have the permitting, you have the connection to the network, to the grid, and you have the authorization to operate. You're going to add a battery, you're going to add some solar in your onshore field. There is huge value in redevelopment. Again, if you're working with professionals, this is where you can, start with an asset at 7.5, 8% return. 8.5 would be a good pricing for just the base case. But if you have a redeveloper to increase the capacity to build batteries, operate them, and basically increase your injection on the network, you can add 300 to 400 basis points to your equity IRR. And obviously, again, a lot of mid-sized players, a lot of pipelines already authorized, ready to build, and these sort of smallish players are incapable of delivering the upside. So there's an opportunity to go to them and offer them the ability to make a quick buck, let's say, on selling the ready-to-build assets, and for you to do the bulk of the upside. So if we move to the following page, can somebody help me to move the page? Roland, yeah, oh, here we go. So Spain, again, I am very unhappy with the grid. I am very unhappy with the regulation. Too many developers, so we're looking at it, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So again, Spain is really not my favorite market at this stage. Italy is much better organized in terms of grid and in terms of regulation. There's definitely much more need and not much more room to grow in this market. So again, for this sort of plain vanilla type of verticals, it is interesting. It offers on top of, let's say, the regulated revenues that you get in Germany for your onshore, you still get 200, 300 basis points on top. And there is a lot of opportunities because there's a very supportive organization towards installing batteries. This is really for a very exciting market at this stage that we want to look at. Germany, perfect market into regulation, very well organized. The problem is there's probably a little bit too much money for my taste, and I don't see how I can make double-digit returns in this market in a safe environment, but maybe other people on this phone call have different views about it. But I don't see many opportunities coming my way in this market at the moment. Nordic is really an industrial catastrophe. So again, onshore, offshore market is on corporate PPAs. They have exhausted the corporate PPAs. The corporate PPAs are managed by people who are not energy professionals. They are pure financiers and bankers like me. And therefore, I would strongly advise against putting your money down there. Typically because the potential for corporate PPAs to buy your electricity is lowering and it's super competitive. So you're going to give prices which are not super important, and there's massive overproduction with little protection. One of the key aspects of this sector, especially onshore, offshore, is the inability to export on other markets, the surplus of production on the windy day. So probably, again, not my favorite environment to work in. UK, we look at it. There's also a problem of one of the few markets where there is a lot of equity available, unlike the rest of the market. We're not very happy with the returns. We're not very happy with, let's say, the instability in terms of regulation. So we have really a wait-and-see approach, but this is not our priority at the moment. France, again, coming back, it's a very mature market. Don't invest any money with somebody who wants to build new onshore, because that's obviously a good way to lose money. But again, there's if you work in a platform with a developer who can redevelop the asset, again, adding more capacity, adding a battery, adding a solar plant on the same field as the turbines, we think there's opportunity to do, let's say, reasonably safe double-digit return. Again, you buy at upper single digit, like 8, 8.5, but you can reasonably target anything between 10 to 12% with redevelopment. Again, it requires working with people who are true industrial, so people who can manage batteries, who can manage the connection, not just paper company put together by bankers. And today we are definitely seeing the difference. The paper company with just bankers and no industrial know-how are going to disappear over the next 24 months. They're putting up their asset to sale right now. And basically, I'm in the process of building just a platform just to do that, to buy asset and redevelop them in the future. Offshore wind. Basically, for me, it's essentially a market where we think this is mainly, let's say, a market for two players, which are large utilities with the capacity to present to answer some very large auction. And the second buyers are basically institutionals who are buying ready to build the brownfield assets. I've spent 10 years at EDF, so I might make a confession. I've always had very strong reservation on the sector, just because the length of the development is always a nightmare. The costs are up, and you've seen the offshore auction in Germany, which have largely failed. There is a big problem in terms of pricing because of capex. And more generally, if you talk to professionals, industrial professionals in the sector, you are in a situation where there's a still, and I know it's a shocking news to some investors, but there is still a very big uncertainty in terms of O&M cost and duration of the asset. And I'm really not comfortable with that. So again, capex inflation, very long development cost, O&M uncertainty. I think it's really a gain for me for large utilities, but in the future, I'm not sure it's such a very exciting investment proposal for investors. So for some reason, there's a couple of pages missing. So we're moving to biomethane. This is a sector where there's definitely probably one of the strongest momentum in terms of regulation. So typically because you want to replace Russian gas, and I want to quote Italy, but Germany is also interesting, France. So that's a positive. The second very good positive is that it's a highly technical sector. So there's definitely big barrier to entry. So again, my policy usually is to invest in early stage developments, but I never do it on my own. I never built, let's say, a paper company with a theoretical know-how. But because these are very complex assets, contrary to what you're usually told, reaching the production levels that you target in the business plan is usually very difficult. When you look carefully with specialists and engineers, you find out that the number of companies that officially do biomethane, within that, there might be I don't know, anything between 10 and 20% who are actually able to manage internally the O&M performance. So it's an exciting market. Again, good environment in terms of regulation, good revenues because you've got some pretty high barrier to entry. You just have to be very careful in my sector of people telling you, oh, this is a mature technology. And biomethane is probably one of the worst examples. The two, let's say, things that when you put your money up there, and again, there's a lot of greenfield development, a lot of opportunities. The three things that you need to be very careful about. The first is the length of your contract for input and offtake. And typically, I never invest in assets that I'm not sure to make at least one time my money in equity during the duration of the contracted period. And I think it's a very important discipline to have that other competitors of mine haven't followed. And today they're losing a lot of money by being too speculative. So intake, outtake contracts is super important. And the second idea is be very careful and do your due diligence on the industrial company that's going to manage your asset. A lot of, again, a catastrophe in my sector of people financing greenfield developments too early and with the wrong people, and instead of and the COD basically moving by 6, 12, 18 months, just because it is a complex asset to operate. The main issue, obviously, on this sector is you've got to be super confident on the regulation. The end cost of the biomethane is still 2 to 3 times, if not 4 times, the cost of natural gas. And obviously, you need to be spending a bit of time as to determine the stability of your regulation environment. So Italy, again, I know it's paradoxical and I'm being repetitive, but Italy, in terms of regulation, in terms of quality of operator, there's maybe 3 or 4 operators. It is, so let's say, an attractive market to do greenfield. As you can see, there's a lot of deals on the upper right corner of these slides. We're still receiving opportunities today. So again, with the caveat that I told you about the feed-in tariff, about who's providing the input of your machine and who's operating it, we think that's probably one of the green or more interesting market to look at. Germany, I'm not a huge specialist in biomethane. I'm still trying to sort out which would be the better provider. But I see also quite a bit of activity in terms of investment. But I confess that on this sector in particular, I'd be interested to know more, but I find the market a little bit difficult to penetrate for a French firm like mine. Again, Netherlands, we're also looking at it. They have a very good regulatory environment, but it's a small market. So we looked at a couple of opportunities in the mid-cap sector. Got a couple of good companies. It's just you have to be careful about, as I said, feedstock and operational risk. But it's not by far the worst market to invest in. I think the same I can say about Denmark. It's attractive regulation for the Denmark market. There seems to be a bit of activity, but also it's let's say within that particular sector we are interested. It's just a little bit of a smaller market. Poland again. This is probably on the top of my list of where to do business. There's a lot of opportunities to grow. There's a lot of opportunities to build a platform with a professional, and there is, let's say, a favorable regulatory environment. And this is definitely one of my priorities over the next 24 months to enter this sector. My other priority for biomethane is Italy, where I see a lot of opportunities. France is more difficult because France is a couple of very large players and then a myriad of very tiny plants which are not working. So you need to find a way to buy these very tiny assets, but I don't see myself investing in a new platform. Again, a very high barrier to entry, so it's not probably a good idea to enter. In the UK, it's also let's say a very active market in this front. We're also looking at the asset class. There's probably a little bit more money than in continental Europe to invest. So we're waiting to see something exciting in terms of pricing with developers. We haven't seen it so far, but let's say it seems to be a reasonably interesting market. The French market, again, I said it, the support, there's two big players, the rest are tiny players, and because of the industrial risk, you probably don't want to do a new company in this sector, and mid-market is quite weak in terms of opportunities. Up. Energy from waste. So obviously, this is I think for me it's a very interesting sector because structurally, again, it is a highly technical asset class, so strong barrier to entry, good pricing, definitely some growth. There's some basically difficulty on the EU stance, but it's not unsolvable. There's a lot of greenfield asset. You can buy greenfield, you can buy brownfield asset today, operating with a good track record at a low double-digit IR. So accompanying good companies with a good track record on a platform basis where you take some greenfield risk can be interesting. The one thing you be careful about is obviously planning and permitting, which can make development very long. And the second aspect is like biomethane. The key is to make sure that you have, also, of course, a good technical operator, because these are difficult assets to operate, but also strong visibility in terms of take of your electricity, your heat. But the main source of revenue is basically the local municipalities paying you to get rid of the waste. And there you have to be very careful not to have any volume risk. So this is contractually quite fidgety. These are complex assets to build, but we think the revenues in the long term are quite sound. We see a lot of greenfield. The key there is, again, there's probably in France, there's probably 5 players who are able to build and operate these assets. So you need to spend a lot of time to build with them a platform and to find a way to share the upside and downside. These are quite large companies, so they're always interested to have a co-investor or even to deconsolidate the asset to free up some space on the balance sheet. But contractually, it's probably one of the most complex transactions I ever looked at. So we're moving on because I have 5 minutes left. BSS is obviously the single most exciting asset class in Europe today. Over 10 years, I think the cost of batteries have diminished by 91%. So this is a very interesting and indispensable. I mean, there will not be again no new nuclear in Europe, so you're going to have to basically rely on batteries plus a renewable at some point if you want to meet the demand for electrical vehicle and data storage. This is typically an asset class where investors have been lied to in terms, and they've been lied in terms of the type of economical risk. So the first teasers for BSS were in the UK about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm very happy to report that the companies that have raised money in the UK are in the verge of bankruptcy today. Why are they in bankruptcy? Because basically these are not infrastructure. It's just putting a battery in the middle of the field and then doing just energy arbitrage, buying when the electricity is low and selling when it's high. And obviously, if everybody builds battery, this arbitrage opportunity disappears. And if the arbitrage opportunity disappears, you have a stranded asset with 0 revenue. So this is not infrastructure investing. This is trading investment. What we are looking at is basically to look at each market very carefully and to sort out what are the recurring revenues that the grid of the government can give you. And in terms of government support, Italy is by far one of the best. You also have grid revenue, but instead of energy arbitrage, you need to build a viable economic model. What is it? Very simple. You buy renewable fields and you have an integrated battery with the capacity to operate them, both in terms of energy production and curtailment, but also to be on the market to inject your energy. So again, this is probably one of the clearest blue sky in the sector. You definitely need to look at it. I'm not going to go through all the markets, but basically, the UK is probably one of the worst. Italy is probably one of the most advanced. Also, although I've seen today that the most recent success auction by the state have been over successful, so I'm a little bit concerned that there might be a little bit of a bubble. But let's say the market fundamentally is one of the healthiest, and we definitely need to look at it. Germany is probably a little bit too early stage for me, so I'm looking at it, but not very actively. I have 3 minutes left. So in EV charging, I've been when I was at EDF, I was burning cash to the tune of 20 million every year because I was hoping that the EV market was going to pick up. It never did, and every year the guy, the CEO of the company doing EV charging for EDF was looking at me and saying, "This year it's going to happen." So the volumes are still a bit late, but a couple of things. You need to make sure there is definitely obsolescence, technological risk there. So please hire an engineering firm, and before you invest any money in there, make sure you have somebody who understands the technology, can manage it, can operate it, but also the ability to make it evolve, so towards super fast charging. The second thing that you need to be very careful about, there is two models. One is what I call merchant, which is EV charging in the street or on the highways. The other is captive. Be sure that you mix your revenue mix. Obviously, captive is a little bit more expensive and difficult to find, but it's certainly a lot safer for your future. I am today extremely confident in this sector. I think the pricing is typically one I'm very excited about. 12 months ago, expected return on asset co in EV charging in France were probably 8 to 9%. Today, we don't accept to look at anything below 12. So again, good repricing moment. Now is the moment to scratch your head and to decide where you invest your money. But this is really, I've been in this business for 10 years. The last 12 to 18 months have been really exciting in terms of number of opportunities. You have to be careful. Not everybody is going to survive, but it's an exciting market. Fleet decarbonization, plain vanilla, you couldn't have very good return, so low double digits. So we're looking at the one transaction now. And grid interconnection, I would love to invest in that, but to be honest, I don't see anything coming my way, so which sounds viable. And in terms of industry, hydrogen for me is one of the sector which is black. I read, and I don't want to look at it. I'm very happy to see a lot of my competitors losing their shirt because when they invested their money, they were looking at me and laughing at me because I was not investing in the sector. H2 is not mature. H2, don't spend too much time. It still have to reinvent itself. These are very complex transactions, so I would probably stay away in the short term. Biofuel is also not viable today unless you force airlines to buy this fuel. This is not, and I repeat, not an infrastructure investment in energy. It's a long-term investment over a potential fuel selling. There's no contracted revenue beyond 3 to 4 years. This is a very dangerous, financially dangerous sector because the returns are quite low and you have zero visibility in terms of return. So I would strongly advise to stay out of it. And finally, 1 minute. So this is probably one of the most exciting sector. District heating, super regular revenue, huge barrier to entry. Problem there is number of opportunities. And typically, when I buy a developer, maybe I pay 5 times EBITDA. If you want to do district heating in Europe, it's more in the region of 15 to 20 times. So that's probably the main drawback of the sector. Energy efficiency, again, this is paper energy transition. It's not infrastructure, and I'm begging you to stay out of it. And this is the list of catastrophes in my sectors. So again, you will go through the document. What the point I'm trying to put ahead is that happy times, happy money, where you would invest in anything and see later in 5 years if it works, these are over. So when you lose €500 million by building a gigafactories of batteries, this is a sign of a bubble that has bursted. You will find other examples of these, let's say, a crazy bubble. What I'm again trying to push ideas that this period is over. People have already lost their shirt. A lot of them are going to lose their shirt over the next 12 months, but you have dry powder now. This is a good moment to go. And I'm finished almost on time. 2 minutes over time. Roland? Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Matthieu, for this very comprehensive and broad overview. I'm sure it's going to be very beneficial for our audience to recap and have a look into your presentation afterwards, because it was so much information, and also it's going to be useful maybe to recap and have a look into the recording, which is going to be published as well. And I would like to encourage you, the audience, to ask questions. Use the GoToWebinar tool to ask questions, because I'm sure there are going to be more questions. So I will start with one question. Matthieu, you mentioned the negative pricing as a major headwind in the solar wind sector. You mentioned particularly Spain.
Yeah.
What could be a solution to this issue on the next cycle, and how do you see the interconnection with the storage sector and the development in the storage sector?
So obviously this is the single most important issue. So basically negative pricing triggers two things which you need to look carefully from a technical point of view. The first is that all the new greenfield, the regulator will force you to cut your electricity within 15 minutes of being given the order. So you need to have the capacity to do that. If you don't, you're going to pay huge fines. A lot of developers don't have this capacity, and they're going to have to be forced selling the asset. Point two, in terms of pricing and your return, in a regulated environment, usually, yes, you have to curtail and stop producing. You have to go into the contractual arrangement. You do get a fixed computation by the regulator. So this is the first block. The second block, which is much more important, is you have, like in the Texas market that I know, in the future, every single big asset will have its battery to move the load by about 4 hours to a moment where it is more favorable to sell. So in principle, this is quite simple. The technology is there. What you need to make extremely sure and be very careful when you invest is that everybody is saying, I can do battery, no problem. Don't worry, look at my slides. I have plenty of projects to install battery. Push that aside, throw it in the bin. The one thing you got to make sure when you invest is that the operator is able to manage the battery plus the production instantaneously. I financed a startup at EDF 10 years ago who does that. In France, there might be 3 companies who have a viable software to do that, not 15, 3. And usually what happens is that if you're developers and you say you do battery, but you don't actually battery, is when you look in the due diligence, they outsource this service software to EDF, RWE, etc. And obviously this is a nightmare because it's a black box. In other words, the RWE trading room will take your asset and do the arbitrage, and they will keep a huge portion of the revenues, because obviously in there's hidden revenue. So typically we've looked at this asset class for 24 months. We did a deal with ZE Energy, who is one of the 3 French companies who managed that. But the solution looks simple. Be careful, my friends, where you put your money is. Not everybody is able to operate this. And the last idea is, my recommendation for you is, do not invest in battery standalone. That's a nightmare, because that's not an infrastructure, it's just some trading opportunities. And it's the best way is to have the battery and the solar plants or the wind together on the same site. there's a lot of benefits to that. Typically because you paid a lot of money to be connected to the network, but you use it for 4 hours a day, which is stupid. The battery allows you to inject during a lot longer time. So this is important. So I am a bit long, but obviously solar plus battery is really important.
Right. Thank you, Matthieu. Next question is on the ongoing Russian aggression in Ukraine. How do you assess the impact of the ongoing geopolitical insecurities and also depending on different countries and sectors, and also dependence on the gas prices?
Okay. It's a complex situation. So in terms of pure geopolitical risk, I did a conference call 2 days ago with the secret French generals who is very concerned, obviously, in terms of instability in the future. And typically he told me I should be probably careful about not investing in the Baltic countries. But more basically in terms of energy, I can't predict the future. What I'm looking at is that gas prices, energy prices during the start of the Ukrainian crisis was a major trauma for everybody in the industry, not just in the sector. So the political people I can meet tells me that, okay, making sure that never happen again is a geostrategic priority. We can't be in the hand of Putin. So today, let's say we're still consuming some Putin gas, but it looks to me as if in terms of storage, in terms of supply, in terms of LNG, we're probably better able to resist. So I wouldn't expect a nightmare in gas prices today, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Then there's another question regarding emerging markets, because you gave an overview on a lot of European markets, and so the question from the audience: would you look at all? Would you look at all at energy infrastructure assets in emerging markets?
Again, you have yes, I would. Again, I'm not a very adventurous investor. Again, my rule is I need to make 100% of my equity back during the contracted period of my asset. So when the revenues are guaranteed. So I'm not super adventurous. Emerging market, the market I would look like definitely our market with there's a huge let's say a potential locally to replace carbonated resources by hydro or by solar. So obviously the problem is more of regulation, and the quality of regulation is usually extremely bad. So basically the calculus is to compare the levelized cost of electricity of a solar plant in Chile with the price of electricity for the basic consumer, and make sure that you have a gap of 2 to 3 times. That's going to safeguard you over the long term. But let's say Latin America is interesting, and we're definitely looking at transaction in Brazil at the moment, and also Chile. I'm not the best specialist of emerging market Asia, and there's also some opportunities in let's say what I said is when is typically in some countries in Africa there is off-grid opportunities to roll out a lot of capex, but it remains a very highly risky environment if you don't have the stable regulation around you. So I'm probably not a good advisor on this sector at the moment.
All right, thank you. If you're interested in emerging markets, I could recommend to you our next webinar, which will be on 4th of November, Unlocking Growth Insights on Private Equity in Africa. So that could be interesting for you. So if there are no more questions for today, I once again want to thank you, Matthieu, for this very interesting broad presentation, and I encourage you to have a look into the slides and also to our recording. And we hope to welcome you at some of our next events in November, the Real Assets Symposium and the ESG workshop.
Thank you very much for the opportunities, and hopefully we'll meet again soon. This is a good moment to invest in my sector. Take care.
Take care. Goodbye.
Goodbye.